Let's have a lesson and discussion on this work. Follow the lesson for free and just pick up all the tips from the video. But if you're interested, I do have a sheet music edition of all 25 etudes and Carcassi's Op.60, and there's a link for that in the description. So etude number 8 has an arpeggio texture with the descending slur. Very didactic kind of study because that texture remains exactly the same through the whole work, with the exception of a couple places where he just does an arpeggio. But you're really working your arpeggios and mixed in with your descending slurs, which means that you're having fixed fingers while doing descending slurs. So in a way, it's a finger independence exercise as well, because if your positioning is off, those slurs will suffer quite a bit. So everything has to kind of come into order. And in some ways, this piece is one of the easier pieces in the collection when you first start playing it, because it's so straightforward and simple. You just play that arpeggio and you play that slur. None of the chord shapes are crazy difficult, not much upper position work. However, when you go to record it, for example, it can be quite difficult. And I listen to a lot of professional recordings of this work, and I have to say I don't love a lot of them because it's something about the pieces. It's just tricky on the classical guitar. You know, it's a lot of that mid-range sound, and with those descending slurs mixed in with the chord shapes, there's lots of opportunity for muffled slurs and things that just aren't clean. So great etude in that regard, because it gives you a lot of opportunity to work on these things and clean it up. One thing I also found is that most professional recordings take it quite slow, and I would actually caution a little bit on that. There is an advantage, though, is that if you are going to treat each of those slurs very musically, you know, like really do a nice, like strong, weak, kind of nice phrasing on each one, then going at a slower tempo allows you to really do that and isolate that and really highlight it. However, because it happens throughout the entire piece, I do find that a slightly faster tempo gets you moving forward. Also, it gets you working this bass line, which really, you know, is a through rising line. And he has crescendos marked, like he starts in piano and crescendos into a forte through that 8-bar phrase. And I think going at a slightly faster tempo carries you through that phrase much more easily and allows you to do a little bit more of that dynamic shaping. So I'll leave it up to you what you want to emphasize, whether you want to emphasize the overall kind of shaping and phrasing and dynamics, or kind of go a little bit slower and make each of those, you know, really focus on each of those. Ideally, we could do both, but finding that happy medium where you can do both is one of the challenges in this work. So let's just talk about how we can practice this piece. One way is you could just practice the chord forms. If you play things in block shapes and then just maybe play the released note, you can teach the left hand all of the shapes in the etude before worrying about the slurs and the cleanliness that's involved. That's a great way to teach your left hand the shapes that will be required in the piece. That could really help you solidify the piece by quite a bit. I've said this many times in the other pieces, but when you go to play it legato, you're probably going to have to get just the bass note first, right? You know, you have to get that bass note and then get the rest of the notes. It's so essential that you get that next bass note to connect the shapes musically in sound, right? To actually get sound connecting. If you do block shapes, you have to take all your fingers off, put them all down, but that means there's going to be gaps in the sound between each one. You want to minimize that by getting... You can practice it out of rhythm and making sure you just always get that bass note right away. So that's two ways you can practice the left hand shapes in the piece, is block shapes or just really transitioning and getting that next bass note. In terms of the slur itself, a nice kind of strong weak slur is good here, but you also want it to be crisp. So whenever you're doing the inner strings, playing it on the inner strings, you could, just for practice, you wouldn't necessarily do this in performance, but you could do like a little rest stroke with your left hand where your finger actually comes down and snaps into the string below rather than lifts off or lifts off at a plucked angle. But just to get a really crisp slur. Obviously that's a little too strong there for performance, but I could lighten it up. But you know, when I teach students how to do descending slurs, pull-offs, snapping into the string below can really help clean up the sound, make it very snappy and clear. So practicing it like that, just practicing, not playing it in performance, but practicing. Of course, you can't do it on the first string, but you can pretend to snap it down into an imaginary string below, right? Practicing in that way, it can be really helpful, especially in the muddier strings like the third string. I have a carbon third string on today. This piece has so many lines on the third string. It's so muddy. I find carbon strings just on the third string are really helpful. But nevertheless, you can clean up that sound also with your fingernail angle on the string, of course. But like I was saying, practicing that left hand rest stroke can be really helpful, especially on the inner string, to clean that up. And you'll find if you practice like that a lot, when you actually go to play the piece and just do more pull-offs with a slight angle to the finger, you'll get a little bit more of that snap. The muscle memory in your left hand will remember that downward motion. You'll get a little bit more snap and clarity out of the sound. So in this piece, lots of opportunities to practice in a certain way and then perform it in a freer kind of way. I think that's about it for my tips, is just track the bass line can really help you track the phrasing and the dynamic shaping. And then that little slur can be treated as musically as you can, depending on the tempo that you take. So let's do a quick walkthrough. I don't think there's too much to mention in this piece in terms of oddities, but if we see anything, point it out. Find because of the chord shapes, my alignment of my left hand goes off a little bit sometimes, and then when I go to do the bar, suddenly I'm misaligned a little bit. So just be very careful that you're trying your best to keep that alignment actually more like that rather than this. The slurs get harder and harder the more angled your hand is. So if it's aligned, not only will your slur be more crisp, but you'll be more prepared for those bars as well. Now here, I jumped down. You could play it by going up, but I find it's like so muddy, and we eventually need to kind of go down. So you could play it up here, or you could jump down. Jumping down is fine, but as long as you're kind of placing those bass notes, place, you know, the musicality and that tough shift can come together a little bit to smooth it out. But it's just also another case of just that free finger really focusing on what the next note is and decreasing that gap that could occur there. Same thing here, some tricky shifts. But if you really are like placing that bass note, placing it musically, getting that kind of sound where you're making it a little bit more obvious, the musicality and the shifts can work fine together. I like that he kind of switches and does some arpeggios here. Kind of picks up the momentum in a way. If you've looked at the original publication, you'll notice that in measure 2 and 11, there are originally no slurs, but because of the didactic nature of the piece, I added them in and did that fingering. It's very possible that Carcassi just didn't. Maybe he used an open string and just did an arpeggio there, but it's quite possible to do it with a slur, and it could be an error in the original publication, or it's just something that we can add to it now to increase our study capabilities. So a great little study, lots of things to work on. At first, it might not seem like the biggest workout, but you'll actually find that trying to polish it is not as easy as it seems. So making it a really excellent etude to work on.